What's up, dudes and dudettes? This is JPRG here, and today I am finally able to review FF7 Remake Intermission DLC now that I got my own PS5. Also, the DLC will be available for free on July 19 for the PlayStation Plus users, so in case you're already subscribed, definitely go grab this DLC for free, and in case you aren't, you might want to consider subscribing since it comes along with this DLC alongside with other games and other features. But in this review, I'm gonna really break down what exactly is Intermission about. Is the story relevant to the main game and the upcoming games? And is there side missions? How long it is? Is it good bang for the buck? Etc. All the things you basically want to know. So, the Intermission takes place midway through the original Final Fantasy VII Remake game, and it follows Yuffie Kisaragi, who is obviously an optional character in the original game. Obviously, that now has been changed, and she is like one of the full characters alongside with Vincent, obviously. And she has come into Midgar in search of hidden materia, which is hidden inside the Shinra building, and she teams up with a fellow Wutayan ninja known as Sonon, and this will be the other character in the party, although not controllable. And in Midgar, she will be meeting basically with Avalanche, not the ones that we are obviously known from the Barret and their Splinter Cell, but the different branch of Avalanche, and they will be basically helping out Yuffie and Sonon to get into the actual building. And that's basically the gist of it. It's broken down into two different chapters basically. The first chapter kind of takes place in the slums, and the second one kind of takes place in actual the Shinra building. So that's kind of like the premise of the story. So let's kind of get into some other aspects here. For one, the playthrough for me was around 7 hours. You can definitely squeeze out more than 10 hours, especially if you're going to be doing all the mini games and side missions and just doing like 100% run basically. And obviously after you play through the game, the hard mode is unlocked, and in case people want to play the game through again, then obviously that is going to be increasing the lifespan of this DLC, but it roughly can be rushed also around in 4 hours. Now, let's talk about the mini-games. There being kind of like three. One is the Fort Condor mini-game, which existed obviously in the original game, has received a massive overhaul, reminds quite a lot like Clash Royale, which is not a game genre I really like, but this was very enjoyable. They really revived this game into like modern standards and added a lot more nuance and strategy to it, and it's obviously a lot more automated compared to the original, which kind of like forced you to give attack commands, which was kind of poor game design, but obviously back then it was what it was. Now, I really liked Fort Condor. There's a couple of these matches that you can play throughout the slums. I maybe want to say like around 6 or 7, and you can like buy these different units which you can use, and also different decks that you can use, which will give you access to different types of materia and all that type of stuff. And it was really enjoyable. I would argue that it was the highlight for the DLC for me personally, and I'm really hoping that Fort Condor will be making an appearance on Rebirth. I do agree though, as a minigame, just adding a bit of a layer of complexity more, like customizing your materia, would have allowed that like perfection to the game. It was a bit too simple in some ways, like in terms of customization and playability, but I really enjoyed it, and I really hope that the team will be bringing it back on Rebirth. But definitely something you can do on the game, which will unlocking you different types of materia, different types of rewards inside the game, so definitely something to at least try. Now, in terms of the other minigame, we have the box destroying, which is kind of similar to what we had with Cloud. This one is a lot better though, because you will be using the shuriken, so it will be throwable, and it's just like overall this was a lot more better experience, a lot more fun. This is another minigame that you can basically play throughout the chapter 2 on the game. It's not as good as obviously as Fort Condor, it's kind of simplistic, but it kind of brings more action element to the game, which probably some people obviously appreciate. Final Fantasy VII did indeed have the most amount of minigames in the whole franchise, so it's kind of living up to its name in that standard, which is really good. Also, you can throw the shuriken in like the normal walkable zones and everything, and you will be getting like your mana restored, or you will be getting a material or other types of items. It's a nice gimmicky feature, and we're probably going to be seeing a lot more of that probably in Rebirth, with Vincent probably using his gun and able to shoot out barrels and boxes and things like that, but we will have to see. Now, in terms of the OST, it brings out a lot of these tracks that we had already on Remake, and also a bunch of new tracks. Some are kind of jazzy and upbeat, and I really like it because it really melds well with Yuffie's personality, being very upbeat type of a character and kind of funny at the same time. And I thought the OST was really great, the new tracks and the blend of like old ones as well. And there was also some like guest tracks, vinyl players, but I don't remember what they're exactly called. But it's essentially, I really like the OST. Now let's talk about some of the story elements here. So one of the cool things that they did was obviously the appearance of Vase and Nero, which are part of the Deep Ground, which were characters introduced in Dirge of Cerberus. Now, Dirge of Cerberus, according to Square, they are not going to be remastering that game, so we might see those game elements being included on the Ever Crisis. But however, I don't know if they have plans to introduce these characters on Rebirth or on third game. I really hope they do, at least in certain sense, maybe as some types of like alternative bosses or something. But they are kind of like a cool element of Shinra, and also, you know, why introduce them if you're not going to be showing them around again later down the line? You have to kind of question that, and especially the last interaction that happens on the finale of the story kind of leaves a bit of open doors for interpretation of perhaps a bit of a revenge matchup between Yuffie and Nero, for example. So I kind of like that element. Obviously, we get a lot of focus on Scarlet, which kind of sidelined or wasn't really that apparent on Final Fantasy VII Remake, so she gets a bit of a limelight here during this DLC, obviously. And also there's new characters that are introduced. The main branch of Avalanche, which are they're kind of a bit of filler, but they are kind of important to the story in terms of like, you know, Yuffie getting the IDs to get in basically into the main building. But we don't exactly know, are these characters going to be reintroduced in Rebirth or in the third game or another spin-off? That's kind of the important thing. I don't mind adding new characters, that is nice, but we have so many characters from Dirge of Cerberus, before Crisis, and Crisis Core. So fundamentally we have a lot of these characters from the Final Fantasy VII universe which could make appearances on the main trilogy line, and at least in cameos or something to kind of build them up more, and people would appreciate to see Cisne or other members of the Turks and etc., for example, rather than adding these new types of characters which may or may not appear again during the trilogy. Now also, let's talk about Yuffie. And Yuffie's like portrayal on the game has been perfect. Very, very upbeat type of a positive character, which is at the same time kind of cringy. And she's not like explored through her sexuality, so she's not just like a love interest for some type of a character. Neither she is some type of uptight feminist or something. So she's fundamentally like a very rare type of a female archetype in a lot of ways, which I truly appreciate what they have done. And the voice acting for the English version was very, very solid. I did not check out how did she sound on the Japanese one, but I'm pretty sure that they really nailed it as well. And she has become, you know, grown on me a lot more throughout this game than she did on the original one. Now let's talk about a bit of the story, which we did already explore. So answering the question, does the events actually play a huge part in the main game or not? So this is not exactly like seeing the game of Remake through another perspective or anything. It's not really anything like that, but fundamentally it does feel like there is some type of a fundamental character development which is very important for Yuffie, and perhaps characters like Sonon could appear in the future. And also Vice and Nero, they got a bit of a character development here, so in case they're going to be appearing again down the line, that is going to be much appreciated factor for me at least. But in case we're not going to be seeing any of the characters that made appearance on Intermission, the new ones, then I would have to argue that this is kind of like a filler, but also it's kind of nice to have something meanwhile we are waiting for Rebirth and also the Crisis Core, you know, reunion to release. Now let's talk about a bit about the combat here. And I have to say, out of all the 5 characters that we got to play, you know, Cloud has its 2 sword stances, which are very nice. Tifa is a very fast attacker, very, very fun to play. Barret has his gun, and obviously we have Aerith, which is kind of like a ranged caster type of a character. But I felt like Yuffie she has a unique type of a play style, but it felt like it was a lot more button smashing than a lot of the other characters that I played before. So I wasn't necessarily too big of a fan of the gameplay of Yuffie. Obviously that can be explored a lot more in Rebirth if she gets a bit more expansion on the abilities that she can use. And obviously she had a bit of a combo ability with Sonon, and you had the synergy element that was in this DLC, and that's not gonna be obviously around on Rebirth, so how they're going to be replacing that element and still keeping Yuffie as important in terms of, you know, gameplay and combat remains to be seen. So I definitely probably wouldn't play as Yuffie in Rebirth once I got her, but who knows, maybe they're going to be doing some tweaks on her. And obviously a lot of good bosses in this game, a lot of good difficulty I would argue, and obviously there's the Syndra simulator things, which allows you to basically get out, you know, new battles and new monsters to fight. And also we are seeing Ramuh, which I don't remember being on Final Fantasy VII Remake. Maybe my memory is too hazy right now, but I remember that Ramuh was not in it, but I could be wrong. Please make sure to correct me on that in the comment section below. But fundamentally, I did think Intermission was a good DLC. You know, if you're going to be doing all the side stuff, especially for Condor, I would argue it's definitely worth the money. However, in terms of grand scheme of things, the story elements are not really playing that big of a part unless, once again, those characters are making reappearances. And obviously there is that secret ending, and there are a couple of like segments of the main group as well, which were kind of much appreciated fan service, I would argue. So there is a bit of a like important lore there as well, and obviously for a true fan, they obviously want to play everything. And we have seen worse DLC done by Square. This is definitely much better. I maybe wish that they would have like expanded the DLC a bit more, like a 1 hour, like you know, we could have, you know, visited the Wall Town and, you know, Don Corneo, and that could have been interesting, but who knows, maybe they cut it out, because they do use quite a lot of like old content already. Like some of the levels are already in the original game, so they didn't really create that much of like new areas and things like that in this Intermission DLC. However, I do recommend it for the true fans, and especially everybody who wants to learn everything about the lore. But in case you haven't already, now it's time to subscribe and like the video. There's gonna be a lot more Final Fantasy reviews coming along, mod reviews, and also I want to really talk about Rebirth and my wishes for that game in a future video as well. So I would really appreciate for the support, guys. And obviously, let me know in the comment section, what did you think about Intermission? Was it any good, or were you disappointed, or did you like the fan service, and etc. See you soon, guys, on the next video. Cheers!